The tensions in the Caribbean Sea have entered a dangerous new phase as Venezuela's government has issued a fierce denunciation of what it calls a provocative and illegal incursion by United States fighter jets into airspace under its control. The accusation has stoked fears of a wider confrontation between Washington and Caracas, already at odds over the US military's heightened operations in the region. Officials in Caracas revealed that their air defense systems detected the foreign aircraft at a distance of just 75 kilometers from the Venezuelan shoreline, well within what they consider a sensitive zone under their air traffic supervision. The joint communique released by Venezuela's foreign ministry, together with its defense and economy ministries, accused the United States of flouting international law and jeopardizing civil aviation in the Caribbean Sea. The statement described the episode not as an isolated incident, but as part of a pattern of aggressive behavior. Venezuelan officials insist that the presence of advanced US jets near their coast cannot be explained as routine patrols or counter-narcotics operations, as Washington has suggested. Instead, they frame it as an escalation that places civilian air travel and national security at risk. Speaking to the nation in a televised address, Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez delivered a blunt and defiant warning to Washington. Padrino said, "We know about the US military deployment in the Caribbean, but to dare to approach Venezuelan territory, we are watching you. I want you to know that this does not intimidate us. It does not intimidate the people of Venezuela. So the presence of these aircraft flying in the vicinity of our area of influence in our Caribbean Sea near our Venezuelan coast is rude. It is a provocation. It is a threat to the security of the nation." The minister went on to explain that the Venezuelan military had tracked 5 US fighter jets, reportedly advanced aircraft capable of operating at high altitude and high speed, that were detected in flight near Venezuelan waters. According to him, this was a deliberate act designed to test Venezuela's resolve and military readiness. Padrino insisted that the nation's forces remain alert and prepared to defend their sovereignty. The remarks underscored the depth of distrust between Caracas and Washington, which have long been locked in political and diplomatic disputes, but rarely confronted each other in such direct military terms. The latest incident comes at a time when the Caribbean region has already become heavily militarized due to US anti-narcotics operations. Tensions further escalated after US President Donald Trump publicly declared that the United States was now at war with drug cartels, groups that the White House has officially designated as terrorist organizations. This declaration, according to US officials, provides a legal basis for military strikes against cartel operations, including those suspected of operating from or through maritime routes in the Caribbean. Trump's statement marked a significant shift in US policy. What had previously been framed as a law enforcement and counter-narcotics mission is now being treated under the framework of armed conflict. This reclassification allows the US military to take more direct and potentially lethal action, including targeted strikes on vessels suspected of smuggling narcotics. In the past month alone, the Pentagon has confirmed 3 military strikes on boats in the Caribbean that US intelligence alleged were ferrying drugs to American shores. For Venezuelan leaders, however, Washington's rationale does not justify the encroachment on areas close to their territory. They see it as part of a larger geopolitical maneuver by the United States to exert pressure on the Maduro government and to project power across the region. Padrino's televised remarks were not merely a military warning, they were also a political message. The defense minister framed the incident as a test of Venezuela's national dignity, signaling that any further provocations would not go unanswered. His words reflected not only his government's concern about security, but also its intent to rally domestic support in the face of growing international scrutiny. The Venezuelan authorities have repeatedly complained that US military deployments in the Caribbean have created a volatile situation that heightens the risk of accidents or miscalculations. They argue that such actions violate the spirit, if not the letter, of international aviation agreements that are supposed to safeguard civilian air corridors. Meanwhile, in Washington, officials have defended the operations as necessary to curb the flow of illicit drugs into the United States. According to the administration, cartel networks have exploited the porous maritime routes in the Caribbean to move massive quantities of narcotics, posing a direct threat to American communities. US defense planners contend that forward-deployed assets, including advanced fighter jets, are crucial to intercepting these shipments and deterring transnational criminal organizations. However, the US administration's approach has been met with skepticism and criticism both domestically and abroad. Critics, including legal scholars and civil liberties advocates, warn that the shift blurs the line between law enforcement operations and the exercise of war powers. They question whether the president's declaration of armed conflict with non-state actors like drug cartels stretches constitutional limits and sidesteps the oversight role traditionally played by Congress. These critics argue that while combating drug trafficking is a legitimate national security priority, bypassing legislative approval for military action sets a concerning precedent. They point out that the US Constitution vests the power to declare war in Congress, and therefore the new policy raises serious constitutional and legal questions. Despite these objections, the White House has maintained that its actions are fully compliant with domestic and international law. Administration officials argue that the terrorist designation for drug cartels provides ample legal justification for targeted strikes even beyond US borders. They claim that the threat posed by these groups is both transnational and urgent, necessitating swift and decisive measures. To provide further insight into the story, correspondent Susan Tmani reported from New York, explaining that President Trump has formally declared that the United States is now in a non-international armed conflict with Latin American drug cartels, labeling them as unlawful combatants, paving the way for military action. He says this designation gives the United States greater authority to target cartel operations abroad. Tmani went on to note the unease among parts of the US legal community and the broader international audience. Critics, including legal scholars and some civil liberty advocates, say the shift blurs the boundary between law enforcement and war powers, raising concerns about constitutional oversight and whether or not Congress is being excluded in all of this from these decisions. However, the White House insists that its operations are within constitutional law. Her report underlined the growing debate in Washington about how to balance the fight against organized crime with adherence to constitutional principles. The issue is not just one of military tactics, but also of political accountability and the long-standing checks and balances in the US system. Back in Venezuela, the government's accusations have heightened nationalist sentiment. State media framed the episode as proof that the United States is willing to violate norms of international conduct to assert dominance in the region. The Venezuelan leadership, already facing domestic economic hardship and political opposition, has seized upon the incident as a rallying point to portray itself as the defender of the nation's sovereignty. Analysts warn that such incidents risk spiraling out of control, particularly in a region where multiple actors, state and non-state, are operating in close proximity. A miscommunication or an accidental encounter between military forces could spark a confrontation with consequences far beyond the immediate area. The ongoing militarization of the Caribbean also poses a challenge for international civil aviation authorities, which must ensure that busy commercial air routes remain safe despite the presence of military operations. Venezuelan officials have accused Washington of disregarding these safety considerations, while US officials have countered that they coordinate closely with relevant agencies to prevent disruptions. As of now, neither side has shown any sign of backing down. Venezuela continues to assert its right to monitor and defend its airspace, warning that it will respond firmly to any further intrusions. The United States continues its campaign against cartel networks, maintaining that its actions are lawful and necessary for regional stability. This standoff represents more than a dispute over airspace. It is emblematic of the broader geopolitical contest in the Americas, where questions of sovereignty, security, and international law intersect in increasingly complex ways. It reflects the growing tendency for non-state threats, such as drug cartels, to be treated as military adversaries, reshaping the nature of conflict in the 21st century. The stakes remain high for both nations. For Venezuela, the issue is tied to its long-standing resistance to what it perceives as US interference in its internal affairs. For the United States, the challenge lies in demonstrating that its tough stance on narcotics trafficking does not erode the democratic norms and legal frameworks it claims to uphold. In the end, the incident near Venezuela's Caribbean coast has become more than a local security concern. It is a flashpoint that could influence regional relations, test the limits of international law, and determine how far major powers are willing to go in redefining the rules of engagement with non-state actors.